It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Piccadilly.
2014 marks the 100th anniversary of the beginning of World War I. And although the United States didn't enter until 1917, it still affected the entire world. What did Mount Prospect look like during that time? What was happening? In Mount Prospect, a lot was happening. There was a lot of development and things were starting to take hold. It was a very exciting time, despite the fact that it was during war. So at the turn of the 20th century, the world witnessed changes in technology, fashion, politics, culture, society. So it was a time of change for everybody, all over the world, not just in America. But here in Mount Prospect, they were experiencing those changes in addition to becoming a developed community. It was a recently settled area. The farmlands were settled in the 1840s, and in the 1870s, 1890s, between that 20-year period, that's when people really started coming to this area. And then at the turn of the century, because of all of this new technology and things like that, more people decided to, hey, this looks like a pretty good place to settle down, so they did. And it brought industry from Chicago, Milwaukee, outside industry came to Mount Prospect, which was huge. We have the establishment of the railroad. Our depot, our station, was built in the 1870s, and that brought industry in and out. And then at the turn of the century, you see an increase in outside industry, which really built up the town because that increases the population. A lot of those companies brought employees with them, so people were starting to settle here. William Bussey was a huge influence in the development of Mount Prospect. He was a Cook County Commissioner as of 1900. He really pushed for Mount Prospect's development. The streets, the businesses, he owned several businesses, he promoted the local businesses. He had not only influence in the entire county, but also this is where he lived. So like most small towns, Mount Prospect was a very, and is, pretty tight-knit community, especially then because it was so young. Many of the residents were persuaded to settle here by friends and family. Hey, you're in Arlington Heights, come on, down to Mount Prospect. And that was the case with John Mine, who was the first blacksmith. He lived in Arlington Heights and he was persuaded by John Mailing to come down and, hey, we need a blacksmith down here. That was how a lot of people came to Mount Prospect to settle at the turn of the century. It was very much a community. Neighbors would help neighbors build houses, they would help neighbors harvest their fields, they helped neighbors build businesses. So it was very much a community-oriented town, and it still is. Founded in 1910, Edward Bussey went into partnership with a Chicago creamery. They came to Mount Prospect to establish their business, and it became the Mount Prospect Creamery. The Utility Battery Company was another outside industry that came in, and they also came in 1910, and they were located at Elm and Evergreen. As Mount Prospect's industry grew, naturally more people are going to come here and because of employees, and it brings more people to the area, so the population grew. On September 22nd, 1911, a group of citizens came together in the Central Schoolhouse, and they decided to create an organization to better Mount Prospect, to make civic improvements, and they named themselves the Mount Prospect Improvement Association. They brought kerosene lamp streetlights, they oiled and scraped the streets, they purchased equipment for the fire department, So these are all really basic things that every community needs. We need streets, we need street lights at night, and you know, this is a farming community. There's dry corn, there's dry hay, a fire is bound to happen. We kind of need a fire department, they need equipment. So they were all about coming together and improving the town. They didn't have any source of revenue, so they relied on the generosity of the community to fund them. Because they couldn't collect taxes from the people, this was one of the reasons why they pushed so much for the village to become incorporated. So that way they could acquire taxes and keep making the community a better place with development and infrastructure. Another organization that was established right before the war was St. Paul's Lutheran Church. They were established in 1912, and J.E.A. Mueller was their first reverend. He was reverend for 44 years. He married William Bussey's daughter, Sophie, and he was not a local resident. He actually came from North Dakota. He was the new guy, and he ended up marrying the Cook County Commissioner's daughter. So you can imagine how intimidated he must have felt. I'm sure North Dakota wasn't very populated at this time. The St. Paul's Ladies' Aid Society helped the less fortunate citizens. They would host dinners, they would, at churches and schools, they would provide lunches for kids in Mount Prospect. Another major business that was established in the same year, in 1912, was Bussey Buick. That was established by William Bussey. He was in Chicago one day, walking down the street. This was in 1908, when he was walking in Chicago, and he passed a Buick dealership, and he looked inside and he saw beautiful car, and he went inside and purchased it. And a couple years later, he decided to become a local agent or a local dealership for Buick in Mount Prospect. And that brought a lot of attention to Mount Prospect because Buick was a big company at this time. So he would bring 10 employees with him. They would take the train to Flint, Michigan. Everyone would get in a car and they would drive 350 miles back to Mount Prospect. On September 29th, 1913, the Volunteer Fire Department was established. And this was organized by a group of people who also felt the need to better their community and protect their neighbors and their friends and their family. This is a very basic necessity in any community in terms of safety. They came together and they were funded by the Mount Prospect Improvement Association, which purchased a hand pump from Niles Township for $60. They purchased an axe, a ladder, a pike pole, and a bell, which is very important. You gotta have your bell. The first hand pump had to be pulled by hand, and it only held 10 gallons of water. So they had one of these, so it wasn't very powerful, but it was something. It was a good start. And then in 1918, they purchased a Buick fire truck. And that had a 250-foot hose, and it held two 40-gallon tanks. So it was capable of a lot more fire suppression. In the same year that the fire department was established, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, Duchess of Hohenberg, were assassinated. Sides were quickly drawn amongst the Allies, and smaller countries were quickly invaded. But meanwhile, in Mount Prospect, this was also the same year that High School District 214 was established. And this was voted on by both men and women. And this was the first time that women were able to vote in Mount Prospect for a special election. It's just interesting to see these two sparks happening simultaneously. Even though everyone's sleeves were rolled up and everyone's establishing businesses and establishing families, they all took time to have fun. Ernest Gosch was one of the village trustees at the beginning, and he wrote the articles in the newspaper. And he saw a bunch of young boys playing baseball in the streets. And so he went out, he bought himself a glove, joined them, but said, why don't we get out of the streets and go play in the park? Let's go play at Owen Park. So everyone thought that was a great idea. So they all agreed, they all went over there and started playing, and they had so much fun. They thought it was so much fun that well, why don't we play Saturday too? Why don't we play Saturday evening? So they did again.
By Saturday evening, there were more than enough to get a lineup of 2 teams, and a little game of 4 innings was played. All present were so pleased that it was decided to play a game Sunday morning, as there was no services at the church. The game was set between the grasshoppers, the married men, and the June bugs, the single men. Autos lined Maple Street, and the farmers returning from the creamery claimed Prospect Avenue. You have to leave it to the married men. They still show that they were some players too in their days, winning easy 12-7. Baseball enthusiasm runs high in this little burg.
These guys were tired, they're farmers, they've been working all day, and they stopped to watch a baseball game. So it's this whole town coming together to appreciate, the simple enjoyment of life. For the first 3 years of the war, the United States maintained their neutrality. They did support Britain financially and with resources and supplies, but we were not actually in the war yet. And it wasn't until 1914 when Germany ransacked Belgium and when Germany sunk the Lusitania in 1915 that the public opinion of America quickly changed. When the United States declared war on Germany, Mount Prospect had been officially incorporated for just 2 months. Young men from the fields dropped their scythes and their shovels, and they ran and they enlisted into the United States Army because they wanted to serve their country. Some of the organizations in Mount Prospect helped to support the young men who enlisted into the Army. So they put together soldiers' kits, and this was common throughout, not just Mount Prospect, but throughout the country. Different community organizations would put these kits together, and they would hold things like first aid supplies, toiletries, razors, things like that, necessities. And not only were these appreciated by the soldier when they go to their duty station or overseas, but it makes them feel connected with home. These young men had never seen war. They'd never witnessed a war before in their lifetime, let alone fighting in one. So to have that connection with home, that was very important. So these soldiers' kits valued around $5. The Mount Prospect Improvement Association would present these kits. St. Paul's Lutheran Church would present these kits, and they would have town hall meetings. Willie's Hall, which used to be over on Bussey Avenue, they would have town meetings and they would have dances and events, and that's where a lot of these kits were presented to the soldiers. So when the soldier knew that they were leaving, there would be a big gathering at Willie Hall, and they would say goodbye and here's your kit. But essentially it gave the soldiers a connection with home. One of Mount Prospect's young men that joined the Army was Edwin Willie and also his brother Chris Willie. They were a part of the United States Army, and their father was William Willie, who built the Central Schoolhouse. They had a creamery. They were one of the founding families in Mount Prospect. There's a picture of Edwin with his father, William, and his friends and family. They're flanked behind him in a formation. So while he is going overseas to fight and to protect his country and his friends and his family, they're behind him.
May 31st, 1918. Dear Brother Adolf, just a few lines to let you know that I arrived safe. The weather is warm and everything is green, just like summer in Illinois. We had to walk about 3 miles to camp from the place we landed, and when we marched through town, a person sure could notice that this is the old country. All a person sees here is 2-wheeled carts. I don't think they got wagons with 4 wheels. The streets are made of cobblestones and the houses are built of stone. Some of them wear wooden shoes. All I've seen in town are old men and women and children. Little boys like Freddie, and even smaller, ask us for cigarettes. Your brother Edwin.
He was 23 at the time when he was in France. It's a foreign experience that these men went through, and that's why writing letters is so important, because the home front here in Mount Prospect gave him his context. That's what gave his letters to home his context. It's here in Mount Prospect. This is his world. They cut all their oats and hay by hand with a scythe, and they tie the bundles with straw instead of twine.
Most of the farmers only got small tracts of land, and they all live in tiny villages. About every mile there is a small village of farmers. Some of the houses are built of brick and stone, but most of the farm buildings are built of clay, and they look as though they are going to fall together every minute. The house and the barn is all in one building, and in some places the manure pile is in front of the house. So you can imagine how it is out here. Everything is old-fashioned, just like they always talk about the old country about 50 years behind the times.
Edwin tells his brother in this letter that in France they're harvesting their oats with a scythe. Mount Prospect used this method of harvesting in the late 19th century. While he wrote this letter back in Mount Prospect, they were using a steam-powered thresher. So even though Mount Prospect is still a small farming community, they're still more developed and have more technology. And what's interesting about this steam thresher, there were neighboring farms and farmers that they threw all their money into a pot and they bought one steam thresher and they all used it and they all helped each other harvest each other's fields, which I think is incredible. So to him, even though we look at Mount Prospect was still a very small farming town, it was very agricultural, but to him, he's comparing this to France and they're still using scythes and there's, not as advanced as Mount Prospect was at this time. So he's making that connection with home.
July 7th, 1918, somewhere in France. I think they got more wine than water in this country. A soldier can buy all the drinks he wants in this country, buy the bottle or buy the drinks. We have to pay half a franc for a glass of wine. That's 10 cents in our money. But in some places they charge more. They think a person is a greenhorn because they come from a different country. We can also get some beer in bottles, but I don't like the beer. There's no foam on it and it tastes sour just like flat beer. They call it cafe instead of saloon here. They have no bar in the place, just a few tables and chairs like a living house. With best wishes and wishing you all good luck, Brother Edwin.
Edwin's father, William, he owned Willie's Hall and then Willie's Tavern. So Edwin had an idea of what a bar looks like. He's very familiar with that because his father owns a bar. We have a photograph in our collection of the interior of Willie's Tavern in 1919, and it shows men sitting at a table with chairs in the bar, like a living room. You wonder, did Edwin draw inspiration from the bars in France and bring it back to his father's tavern? The one thing that I really noticed about these letters is that he wasn't talking about there's guns going off and I'm in a foxhole, I'm in the trenches. He wasn't talking about the war. He was talking about what he was seeing around him. So even though he's in a completely different country, during a completely different circumstance, they're playing baseball here in Mount Prospect and he's marching across fields in France. This is his home and that's what makes him feel connected. Mount Prospect was already in the process of becoming a developed community. As of February 3rd, 1917, they were officially incorporated as the village of Mount Prospect. 63 people voted for incorporation and 12 people voted against incorporation. They held a town election on February 3rd from 2 to 5 p.m. in the central school. One of the benefits of becoming incorporated is that the Mount Prospect Improvement Association, which essentially became the village, was able to collect taxes and do even more civic improvement and infrastructure. As Mount Prospect was becoming more developed, its development was reported on several times in the Daily Herald.
Progressive Mount Prospect, pleasant people, pushing, pulling, paving, peace praying, purposely played poor pill and pinches, presenting pennant to Palatine Pinkertons. Pill plus pitcher plus pay, pins, pennants.
This is quite telling about the community of Mount Prospect. They are hardworking, they're religious, they're not so great at baseball because they lost to the Palatine Pinkertons, but they're still enjoying their leisure time.
Despite the war and high prices, Mount Prospect is growing, growing, growing. Everybody's interested in its boom and all act in harmony. No slackers here.
So, Mount Prospect was very up and coming. During World War I, pro-war and anti-German propaganda was issued in April of 1917 by the Woodrow Wilson administration. These pamphlets, different publications, films were issued throughout churches, schools, town halls. Mount Prospect was prominently a German community. There were spy finders in the country who would keep a watchful eye on any suspicious activity from German-speaking individuals. And although very few Germans were accused or even persecuted of espionage, it was still a fear. It was a fear for non-Germans, they were afraid of Germans, and it was a fear for Germans because they were afraid of being persecuted. So there was a lot of racism against Germans during this time. If someone heard someone speaking German, it was considered treason. So around this time, the churches and the schools in Mount Prospect exclusively spoke in English. So before this, they had German services at church, they taught school in German, and after this, that was no more because they were so afraid. Martin Haas, who was the school teacher at St. Paul's Lutheran Church, he was approached by a man from the county education system. This individual said, "All you Germans do is teach kids to kiss the Kaiser." Little racist sentiments were spewed at German communities, and it was very scary. So because of that, towns like Mount Prospect went above and beyond to show their loyalty and to show how patriotic they were. And they did this through several different war efforts.
Mount Prospect is certainly a hustling, patriotic village. If she keeps up her pace as she has grown in importance the past 5 years, she will soon become a city with electric cars, paved streets, waterworks, sewer system, etc. She already has splendid train service, high school, gas, electric light, and power.
So there's two things that are interesting about this article. One, it's talking about, look how developed this town is. They're gonna have electric cars soon. This is incredible. And the fact that they threw in patriotic to show, hey, look, we are a very successful town and we've done all of these great things. We've got a high school and we're also very patriotic. So they really wanted to stress that point.
Mount Prospect, with a population 98% German, turned in December 22nd the banner report for the Red Cross memberships showing that 233 families out of a total of 267 had joined the movement. It was promised the village would have 267 members by the end of the year.
So we're almost 100% German, and we are also almost 100% members of the Red Cross. So we can be German. We absolutely acknowledge our heritage and our culture, but we're also very loyal to the war, to this country, and we're showing that by supporting the Red Cross.
We're not shouting out here about patriotism, but we challenge any other part of the country to show a better record in everything connected with the war. We have come across for all of them, and we'll have everyone in the village lined up for the Red Cross.
So another way that they could support the war, aside from becoming a member of the Red Cross, was purchasing Liberty bonds, which were war stamps or thrift stamps. And it was advertised as a competitive thing. Mount Prospect was listed as one of the top selling communities of war bonds versus Arlington Heights or Des Plaines or Palatine. Mount Prospect as a whole sold over $3,000 worth of stamps. There was one individual in Mount Prospect who reached his limit of buying stamps, which was at, I believe, $1,800. It was seen as very patriotic. It was seen as your duty. This is what you need to do. We have our boys fighting in Europe right now. It's our duty to buy these war stamps and to support the war effort. And again, this was another way that they could, yeah, we're German, we're definitely German, but we are also heavily supporting the war effort. Another way that they could support the war was growing victory gardens or war gardens. wasn't officially called Victory Garden until World War II. The food that the commercial farmers were growing was being sent to the troops overseas, and they needed that food. So to kind of alleviate that demand a little bit, the government encouraged people, hey, grow your own gardens, so that way you don't have to rely on the commercial industry. Can your own food and preserve. The campaign encouraged the cultivation of public and private lands, so a lot of times community organizations or groups would purchase a lot together and garden that land, or people would have their own personal garden that they would turn into a war garden and let their neighbors help garden and cultivate from there. It was another community effort, just one more on the list of community efforts that Mount Prospect has done. And again, this was how they could show that they were loyal and that they were patriotic. On November 11th, 1918, marked the official end of the war. The Allies and Germany signed the Armistice, and the aggression dissipated on the Western Front. And it happened during the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. And since then, November 11th has been a day to honor and commemorate those who have fought in the war. It wasn't called Veterans Day until 1954. It was originally called Armistice Day, and it was just to honor those who fought during World War I, and then they decided to incorporate all of the wars. So in Mount Prospect, for Armistice Day, because so many of its young boys and men fought in World War I, they had an Armistice Day parade. Community businesses, residents, everybody was in this parade. The utility battery company has a banner in this parade, and it was to show their support. For this war particularly, we saw a shift in technology. Chemical warfare and machine guns and aircraft and tanks. These young men who have never even witnessed a war in their lifetime went overseas to experience these new gruesome technologies. So the fact that they were able to come home to this awesome parade of businesses and people and their friends and their family was really a big deal. It was really important to have that. The Mount Prospect Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW Post 1337, was chartered in 1925 in Owen Park. And Paul Holste, who was from Mount Prospect and he fought in World War I, he was a part of the Big Red One, the 1st Infantry Division. He was the head of the 1st VFW. He really initiated it. In 1999, Lions Memorial Park built a Veterans Memorial band shell, and in 2012 they expanded the memorial to include a fountain and engraved bricks to commemorate those who had fought in the war. And it's very peaceful and tranquil for friends and family to come and just reflect on the people who have served. Mount Prospect has seen men and women leave for war since its incorporation in 1917. And the community has supported, honored, commemorated all of those who have fought for our right to speak German, if we so please. And they have fought for our right to establish businesses and to play baseball in the street. This community supported the men and the women who have fought, not just in World War I, but throughout all wars. So that way we have these rights, and we're very grateful for that. Mount Prospect is special because it really honors those men and women.